The divorce papers hit the mahogany table with a sound that echoed louder than a gunshot in the silent dining room. To Richard, that sound was freedom, the shedding of a dead-weight wife who mended her own socks and clipped coupons for groceries. To the woman sitting across from him, staring at the papers with eyes devoid of tears, it was a release she hadn't dared to ask for. Richard thought he was discarding a penniless nobody to marry a woman who looked the part of a CEO's wife. He didn't know that the signature he was demanding belonged to a woman whose net worth could buy his entire company 3 times over. He wasn't divorcing a poor housewife. He was declaring war on a kingdom. And the war had just begun. Richard Sterling adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of the hallway mirror, grimacing at a smudge on the glass. It was these little things, the smudges, the slightly worn carpet, the scent of pot roast wafting from the kitchen, that made his skin crawl. They were smells of mediocrity, smells of a life he had outgrown. He was the CFO of Auratech, a company on the verge of $1 billion IPO. He drove a Porsche, he wore Italian suits, and yet he came home every night to Catherine. Catherine, with her messy bun held up by a plastic clip. Catherine, who insisted on darning his socks rather than letting him buy new ones. Catherine, who had walked into the high society gala last month wearing a dress she had bought at a consignment shop, humiliating him in front of the board of directors. "Dinner is ready, Richard," her voice floated from the dining room. It was soft, unassuming, just like her. Richard walked into the dining room, his hand tightening around the manila envelope in his briefcase. He looked at the table. It was set perfectly, as always. Roast beef, roasted potatoes, glazed carrots, a meal that screamed 1950s housewife. "I'm not hungry," Richard said, bypassing his chair and standing at the head of the table. Catherine looked up, her hands pausing over the serving spoon. She was a plain woman, or so Richard told himself. Her hair was a mousy brown, her face free of the makeup that coated the women he worked with. She looked tired. "You have to eat something," she said gently. "You've been working so hard on the merger." "The merger," Richard scoffed, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You don't even know what a merger is, Kate. You think it's like mixing ingredients for one of your casseroles." Catherine lowered her eyes. "I know it's important to you." "It is important, crucial," Richard snapped, "which is why I can't have distractions. I can't have liabilities." He threw the envelope onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, knocking over the salt shaker. Catherine stared at it. She didn't reach for it. She didn't ask what it was. She just stared, her face unreadable. "What is this?" she whispered finally. "It's over, Kate," Richard said, his voice cold and clinical, the voice he used when firing underperforming interns. "I've had the lawyers draw up the papers. It's a fair settlement. You get the house. God knows I don't want this depressing museum. And a monthly stipend for 3 years. It's more than you deserve, considering you've contributed 0 financially to this marriage." Catherine slowly looked up at him. There was no shock in her eyes. No hysteria. Just a strange, deep stillness that Richard mistook for shock. "You're leaving me," she stated. "I'm upgrading my life," Richard corrected, checking his Rolex. "I need a partner, Kate. Someone who can stand next to me at a press conference without looking like they just walked out of a charity drive. Someone like Brittany." The name hung in the air. "Brittany," Catherine repeated. "Brittany Summers, your marketing director." Richard blinked, momentarily thrown. "How did you—" "You're not as subtle as you think, Richard," Catherine said, picking up the envelope. She opened it with steady hands. "She likes Cartier bracelets and expensive champagne. She thinks The Great Gatsby is a manual for living, not a tragedy. And she hates me. She doesn't hate you, Richard laughed dismissively. She pities you. We both do. The cruelty was intentional. He wanted her to cry. He wanted her to scream, to throw the roast beef at him, to give him a reason to feel like the victim. But Catherine just read the papers. Irreconcilable differences, she read aloud. That's a polite way of putting it. Sign them, Kate. Don't make this difficult. If you fight me, I have lawyers who will bury you. You'll end up with nothing. No house, no stipend, just the clothes on your back. Catherine looked at the pen he offered. It was a Mont Blanc, a gift she had bought him for his promotion 5 years ago. He probably didn't even remember. You think I'm poor, Richard? She asked softly. I know you are, he sneered. Your parents were nobodies from some village in Europe nobody can find on a map. You worked in a library when I met you. You clip coupons to save 50 cents on detergent. You are the definition of poor, Kate. It's not a crime, but it is exhausting. I'm tired of carrying you. Catherine closed the folder. She stood up. For a second, she seemed taller. The slump in her shoulders vanished. She looked at Richard, and for the first time in years, he felt a shiver of unease. Her eyes weren't sad. They were icy. Very well, she said. She took the pen. She didn't hesitate. She signed her name with a flourish that looked far too elegant for a simple housewife. Catherine A. Sterling. There, she said, sliding the papers back to him. You're free, Richard. I hope the price of your freedom is worth it. Richard snatched the papers, relief flooding through him. You're making the right choice. Take the weekend to pack your things. I want you out by Monday. Brittany wants to redecorate. Monday, Catherine nodded. Monday is fine. Richard turned on his heel and walked out, already dialing Brittany's number. It's done, babe, she signed. Champagne at the Ritz. I'm on my way. He slammed the front door, leaving Catherine alone in the dining room. She stood in the silence for a long moment. Then, she reached into the pocket of her faded cardigan and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the cracked iPhone 8 Richard allowed her to have. It was a sleek, black satellite phone with no logo. She dialed a number. Hello? A crisp, accented voice answered on the first ring. Henri, Catherine said, her voice shifting. The American softness vanished, replaced by a clipped, aristocratic British tone with a hint of French inflection. Initiate Protocol 0. The asset has been compromised. My lady? The voice on the other end sounded stunned. Are you sure? This means total exposure. He called me a liability, Henry, Catherine said, looking at the cooling roast beef. A small, cold smile touched her lips. I think it's time Richard Sterling learned exactly what kind of liability he just signed away. Prepare the jet. I'm coming home to Valoria. The Ritz-Carlton bar was dimly lit, smelling of old leather and money. Richard sat in a plush velvet booth, the crystal flute of Dom Perignon catching the light. Across from him, Brittany Summers was glowing. She was everything Catherine wasn't. Blonde, tanned, loud and expensive. Her dress was cut low, her diamonds were real, bought with Richard's bonus, and she laughed with her mouth open, scanning the room to see who was watching her. She just signed it, Brittany asked, her eyes wide with delight. Just like that. No crying. No begging. Not a peep, Richard boasted, topping off her glass. She knows she can't compete. Poor thing probably realized she'd starve without my settlement offer. She's terrified of the real world. God, that is so sad, Brittany giggled, not sounding sad at all. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. But seriously, Richard, that house needs to be gutted. The curtains. Hideous. And the garden. Who grows potatoes in a gated community? Do whatever you want with it, Richard said, leaning back, feeling like a king. It's our castle now. Speaking of castles, Brittany leaned in, tracing a finger down his arm. The Preston Smith Gala is next Friday. You know, the one for the European investors? You promised we'd go public there. Richard hesitated for a fraction of a second. The Preston Smith Gala was the most exclusive event of the year in Boston. It was hosted by Lord Archibald Preston Smith, a British billionaire whose approval was mandatory for Aurotech's expansion into the European market. Richard had been trying to get a private meeting with him for months. We will, Richard promised. It's the perfect debut. I'll introduce you as my fiancé. With Catherine out of the picture, I look like a man taking charge of his destiny. Investors like decisiveness. And I need a new dress, Brittany purred. Something that says, Future Mrs. CEO. Put it on the black card, Richard said expansively. At that moment, Richard's phone buzzed. It was an email from the company's legal department. Subject, merger compliance. Spousal vetting. Richard rolled his eyes. Corporate red tape. He opened the email. Mr. Sterling, as part of the final due diligence for the European merger, the investors require a full background check on all immediate family members. Please confirm that your current marital status is married until the divorce is finalized in court, approx 60 days. We need your wife's signature on the NDA regarding the disclosure of family assets. Richard cursed under his breath. He had forgotten about the vetting period. Technically, he was still married to Catherine until the judge stamped the papers. What's wrong? Brittany asked, sensing the shift in his mood. Just paperwork. Richard waved it off. I need Catherine to sign one more thing, an NDA, just to keep her quiet about company secrets. Does she even know any company secrets? Brittany laughed. She probably thinks cloud computing has to do with the weather. She knows nothing, Richard agreed. But the investors are paranoid. I'll swing by the house tomorrow and get her to sign it. She'll do it. She does whatever I say. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet when Richard unlocked the door. He expected to see boxes. He expected to see Catherine crying over photo albums in the living room. Instead, the house was empty. Not just of people, of things. The furniture was there, the TV was there, but the personal touches were gone. The ugly crochet throw blankets, gone. The collection of porcelain cats Catherine's grandmother had left her, gone. The smell of baking bread, replaced by the sterile scent of lemon polish. Kate, Richard called out. Silence. He walked into the kitchen. On the counter, where the divorce papers had been the night before, sat a single set of keys and a small note written on plain white paper. Richard, I have vacated the premises as requested. You will find the house in perfect condition. Do not look for me. Say, dramatic much? Richard muttered. He checked the bedroom. Her closet was empty. She hadn't just packed, she had erased herself. He felt a twinge of annoyance. He needed that NDA signed. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. The number you have reached is no longer in service. He frowned. He tried again. Same message. She cut her phone? Richard stared at the screen. How is she going to call me for the alimony checks? He checked his bank account online, expecting to see a withdrawal. Catherine had a joint account with him for household expenses. It usually had about $5,000 in it. He logged in. Balance, $5,000. She hadn't taken a cent. She's playing games, Richard growled, pacing the kitchen, trying to make me worry, trying to make me feel guilty. He called his lawyer, Mark Hanson. Mark, Catherine is gone. Phone disconnected. I need to find her to sign the NDA for the merger. She can't have gone far, Richard. Mark's voice was raspy from years of smoking. "She has no income, no credit history of her own. She's probably at a motel or a women's shelter. I'll put a PI on it. We'll find her by noon." But they didn't find her by noon. By the time 3 days had passed, Richard was starting to sweat. The PI, a man named Miller, who claimed he could find a needle in a haystack, was coming up with nothing. "It's like she vanished, Mr. Sterling," Miller said over the phone, sounding baffled. "Social Security number hasn't been flagged. No credit card usage. No flights under the name Catherine Sterling or Catherine Miller. No bus tickets. Nothing. She has to be somewhere," Richard shouted, slamming his hand on his desk. His secretary outside jumped. "She's a housewife, Miller. She's not Jason Bourne. She's probably staying with a friend under a fake name." I checked her friends. The library circle. They haven't seen her. They said she resigned via email 3 days ago. Said she was moving home. "Home?" Richard scoffed. "Her parents are dead. She has no home." "There is one thing." Miller hesitated. "I ran a deeper check on her maiden name. Miller. It's a common name, obviously. But her birth certificate. It's weird." "Weird how?" "It's a reissue, issued by the State Department, but the original place of birth is listed as Valoria." "Valoria?" Richard frowned. "Where the hell is Valoria?" "Small principality in the Alps, between France and Italy. Tax haven. Very old, very private." "Maybe she went back there?" Richard laughed. "Valoria? That's a playground for billionaires and royals. Catherine probably was born there because her parents were servants or something. She can't afford a ticket to Valoria." "Just telling you what I found, boss." "Keep looking," Richard snapped. "The gala is in 2 days. If I don't have that signature, the investors might get skittish." He hung up, loosening his tie. He felt a headache coming on. Why was she making this so hard? She was supposed to fade away quietly, grateful for his crumbs. 2 days later. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. This was the event of the season. The air smelled of expensive perfume and power. Richard walked in with Brittany on his arm. Brittany was wearing a neon pink dress that was slightly too tight and slightly too bright for the somber elegance of the room. She had insisted on it. Richard, usually critical, was too distracted to care. He still hadn't found Catherine. He had forged her signature on the NDA that morning. It was a risk, a crime even. But he was desperate. He needed this merger. "Oh my God, look at the chandelier," Brittany squealed, pointing. A few heads turned, eyebrows raised. Richard grabbed her elbow, squeezing gently. "Keep it down, babe. We're here to impress." He scanned the room for Lord Archibald Preston Smith. He needed to make contact. He spotted the British billionaire near the orchestra, surrounded by a tight circle of security and high-ranking dignitaries. Lord Preston Smith was a formidable man, with white hair and a monocle he actually wore unironically. He was chatting with the French ambassador. Richard straightened his jacket. "Wait here, Brittany. Get a drink. I'm going to make our move." He navigated the crowd, flashing his charming CEO smile. He approached the circle. "Lord Preston Smith," Richard called out, extending a hand. "Richard Sterling, Aura Tech. An honor to finally meet you." The circle parted slightly. Lord Preston Smith turned, looking at Richard with cool detachment. He didn't take the hand immediately. "Mr. Sterling," the Lord said, his accent clipped. "I received your proposal. Interesting numbers." "We are very excited about the European expansion," Richard said, his hand dropping awkwardly to his side. "My wife, that is, my partner and I are fully committed." "Your partner?" Lord Preston Smith's eyes flickered past Richard to where Brittany was loudly ordering a vodka tonic. Ah, I see. We have the capital, we have the tech, Richard pressed. All we need is your sponsorship for the EO Regulatory Board. I am a man who values stability, Mr. Sterling, the Lord said slowly, and lineage. Europe is not like America. We care about who you are, not just what you own. I understand completely, Richard nodded vigorously. I come from a very respectable family in Connecticut. Lord Preston Smith looked like he was about to stifle a yawn. Indeed. Suddenly, a hush fell over the room. It started at the entrance and rippled through the crowd like a wave. The orchestra stopped playing. Richard turned. What's going on? The massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. A man in a formal livery stepped forward and struck a heavy staff against the floor 3 times. Thump, thump, thump. Announcing, the herald's voice boomed, projecting without a microphone, Her Serene Highness, the Grand Duchess Genevieve of Valoria, Countess of Miller, and Chairwoman of the Valorian Sovereign Wealth Fund. Richard rolled his eyes. Great. Some royal tourist is here to steal the show. Who is that? Brittany whispered, appearing at his side. A woman stepped into the light at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light, shimmering with thousands of tiny diamonds stitched into the fabric. Around her neck was a necklace that looked heavy, sapphires the size of quail eggs. On her head sat a delicate, intricate tiara of platinum and diamonds. She was regal. She was breathtaking. She commanded the room simply by breathing. She began to descend the stairs, flanked by 4 security guards who looked like they were special forces. Richard squinted. There was something familiar about the way she walked, a grace he had seen somewhere before, maybe in a kitchen, dodging a spilled glass of milk. No, that was impossible. The woman reached the bottom of the stairs. Lord Preston Smith, the man who had barely given Richard the time of day, practically ran forward. He bowed, deeply. Your Highness, Lord Preston Smith said, his voice trembling with reverence, we are honoured beyond words. The woman smiled. It was a polite, diplomatic smile. Lord Archibald, she said. Her voice was crystal clear, elegant, and unmistakably. Richard dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor, spraying Dom Perignon onto Brittany's neon dress. Richard! My dress! Brittany shrieked. But Richard couldn't hear her. He couldn't hear anything but the blood rushing in his ears. Because the Grand Duchess Genevieve of Valoria was Catherine, his Catherine, the woman who clipped coupons, the woman who mended socks. She turned her head slowly, scanning the crowd. Her eyes locked onto Richard's. She didn't look away. She didn't look scared. She raised one eyebrow, a gesture of supreme dominance. And then she winked. The shattering of the champagne flute seemed to trigger a ripple effect in the ballroom. Yet for Richard, time had frozen into a jagged shard of reality. The liquid soaked into the hem of Brittany's neon-pink dress, staining it a darker shade of fuchsia. But Richard couldn't tear his eyes away from the woman standing at the base of the staircase. Kate, he choked out, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. It wasn't the name of the woman in the sapphires. It was the name of the woman who scrubbed his toilets. Brittany shoved him, hard. Richard, you spilled drink all over me. Who are you staring at? It's her, Richard whispered, his face draining of colour until he looked like a wax figure. It's Catherine. Who? Brittany followed his gaze, squinting at the royal figure chatting with Lord Preston Smith. She laughed, a harsh, barking sound. That? That is not your frumpy ex-wife, Richard. That woman is wearing a tiara worth more than your life. You're drunk. I'm not drunk, Richard hissed, panic rising in his chest like bile. I know my own wife, Brittany. That is Catherine. He took a step forward, driven by a chaotic mix of confusion and entitlement. He had to know. He had to prove he wasn't crazy. "Catherine!" he shouted. The sound cut through the polite murmur of the room. Several dignitaries turned to look at him with expressions of mild distaste. The security detail flanking the Grand Duchess tensed, their hands hovering near their jackets. The woman didn't flinch. She simply turned her head, the diamonds in her tiara catching the light, and looked at him with an expression of polite curiosity, as if he were a particularly noisy waiter. Lord Preston Smith looked between them, his monocle nearly popping out. "Your Highness, do you know this individual?" Catherine Genevieve smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Know him?" "In a manner of speaking, Lord Archibald, one meets many people when one is conducting anthropological research." "Research?" Richard pushed past a waiter, ignoring the gasps. He marched up to the circle, Brittany trailing behind him, looking confused and embarrassed. "Kate, what the hell is this? What are you wearing? Is this where you've been for 3 days? Playing dress-up?" 2 security guards stepped in front of him, creating a wall of muscle. One of them was the man who had answered the phone, Henry. Up close, Henry looked less like a butler and more like a man who knew 17 ways to kill someone with a napkin. "Step back, Mr. Sterling," Henry said, his voice low and dangerous. "Mr. Sterling?" Lord Preston Smith repeated, his face darkening. "The man from Auratech. You know, the Grand Duchess." "Grand Duchess?" Richard laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "This is Catherine. She's a librarian. She buys her clothes at Goodwill. Tell them, Kate. Tell them this is some kind of sick joke." Catherine gently placed a hand on Henry's arm, signaling him to stand down. She took 1 step forward. The height difference was sudden. She was wearing heels, yes, but her posture made her tower over him. "Richard," she said. Her voice was the same one that used to say, "Pass the salt," but the timbre was different. It was steeped in centuries of authority. "I see you brought Ms. Summers. The neon is a bold choice for a black tie event." Brittany bristled, stepping out from behind Richard. "Excuse me. Who do you think you are?" "Brittany, shut up!" Richard snapped, his eyes fixed on his wife. "Kate, explain. Now." "I believe the Herald already explained, Richard," she said coolly. "I am Genevieve Marie-Therese of the House of Valoria, Countess of Miller." "Miller," Richard whispered. "Your maiden name? You said your parents were nobodies from a village." "I said my parents were from a small place in Europe you couldn't find on a map. Valoria is small, Richard, but it is not insignificant." She adjusted her sapphire necklace. "And I never said they were nobodies. You assumed everything because it suited your narrative of being the savior, the successful businessman rescuing the poor immigrant girl. But the coupons," Richard stammered, his world tilting. "The socks, the old car. You lived like a pauper." "I lived like a normal person," she corrected, her voice softening just a fraction, revealing a glimpse of the woman he used to know. "I wanted to know what it felt like. To be loved for me, Richard. Not for the title. Not for the sovereign wealth fund. Not for the politics. I wanted a life where someone loved Catherine Miller, the girl who liked books and quiet evenings." She paused, her gaze hardening into diamond-edged steel. "I thought I found that with you. For a few years I was happy. I was just Kate. But then you started to resent just Kate. You wanted a trophy. You wanted a stepping stone." She glanced at Brittany. "So you found one." "I?" Richard scrambled for a defense. "I didn't know. If I had known." "If you had known," Catherine finished for him, You would have paraded me around like a prize poodle. You would have used my title to close deals. You would have loved the Duchess, but you would have still hated the woman. She turned back to Lord Preston Smith. Archibald, I apologize for the interruption. This man is currently processing a transition in his life. I believe he was just leaving. Leaving? Richard sputtered. I'm not leaving. I have business here. I need to talk to you about the investors. Lord Preston Smith stepped forward, his face red with indignation. Mr. Sterling, you have insulted Her Highness. You have caused a scene, and you have brought a guest dressed in— He glanced at Brittany's dress. Highlighter fluid. You will remove yourself, or I will have you removed. But— Go, Richard, Catherine said. She didn't shout. She didn't point. She just spoke the command. Go back to the house I let you keep. Go back to the job I allowed you to have. We will talk when I am ready. Security moved in. This time there was no resisting. Richard was firmly guided by the elbows toward the exit. Brittany scurried after him, clutching her purse, sensing that her debut into high society had just crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. As they reached the doors, Richard looked back. Catherine was laughing at something Lord Preston Smith said. She took a sip of champagne. She looked radiant. She looked powerful. She looked like a stranger. The weekend was a blur of whiskey and panic. Richard sat in his study, the study Catherine had painted a soothing grey for him 2 years ago, staring at the internet. It was all there. Wiki, the Principality of Valoria. GDP, $45 billion, high-tech, banking, rare earth metals. Ruler, Prince Regent Alexander, heir apparent, Grand Duchess Genevieve. There were photos. Catherine cutting a ribbon at a hospital in Geneva. Catherine shaking hands with the Pope. Catherine, his Catherine, wearing a military uniform on a balcony, waving to a crowd. She's a princess, Richard muttered to the empty room. I was married to a goddamn princess, and I had her scrubbing the floor. Brittany had left on Saturday morning. She had screamed something about him being a fraud and humiliating her before packing her Louis Vuitton bags and storming out. Richard didn't care. Brittany was a garnish. Katharina was the main course, and he had just thrown her in the trash. But as the alcohol wore off on Sunday night, a colder, sharper realization hit him. The merger. Auratech was trying to merge with Orion Dynamics, a European conglomerate. The deal relied heavily on securing rights to specific microchips produced in— Richard froze. He scrambled for his laptop. He pulled up the supply chain documents for Orion Dynamics, primary supplier of cobalt and lithium for microchips, the Valorian Mining Consortium. Owner, the Crown Estate of Valoria. Oh no, Richard whispered. Oh God, no. He checked the board of directors for Orion Dynamics. There, listed as a silent partner and majority shareholder via proxy, the Miller Trust. Catherine didn't just know the investors. She was the investor. Monday morning arrived with the grim inevitability of an execution. Richard drove to the Auratech headquarters. He felt like a ghost. He walked past the receptionist who gave him a pitying look. Had she seen the news? Was it on the news? He entered the conference room. The entire board of directors was there. They were silent. The CEO, Marcus Thorne, a man Richard had always considered a friend, wouldn't meet his eyes. "Richard," Marcus said, his voice grave. "Sit down." "Marcus, listen," Richard began, his voice shaky. "I know what happened at the gala was unorthodox. But I can fix it. I can talk to her. She's my wife. We have a history." "She's not your wife, Richard," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. "According to the papers you filed, she is your ex-wife as of 3 days ago, and according to the legal brief we received this morning, She is also our hostile acquirer." "What?" "The Miller Trust," Marcus said, rubbing his temples. "They bought 51% of the outstanding shares of Auratech this morning. Pre-market trading. They paid a premium, we couldn't stop it." Richard felt the blood leave his head. "She bought the company?" "She bought us, Richard. She owns the building. She owns the patents. She owns the coffee machine." The projector screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The image wasn't a PowerPoint slide. It was a live video feed. Catherine sat at a desk in a room with high ceilings and gold leaf trim. She was wearing a sharp white business suit that cost more than Richard's car. Henry stood silently behind her. "Good morning, gentlemen," Catherine said. Her voice was amplified, filling the room. "I apologize for the remote attendance. Valoria is lovely this time of year, but the commute is dreadful." "Your Highness," Marcus stood up, bowing slightly to the screen. "We are surprised by this acquisition." "It was a necessary move," Catherine said, clasping her hands. "Auratech has potential, but its leadership has been lacking in vision and morality." Her eyes on the screen shifted. She looked directly into the camera lens. Richard felt like she was staring into his soul. "Mr. Sterling," she acknowledged. "Kate, Genevieve," Richard pleaded, standing up. "You can't do this. This is my company. I built the financial structure. I'm the CFO." "You were the CFO," Catherine corrected gently. "As the majority shareholder, my first act of business is a restructuring of the executive suite. We are removing dead weight. I believe that was the term you used. Dead weight and liabilities?" Richard gripped the edge of the table. "This is revenge. This is personal." "It is business, Richard," Catherine said, her voice icy. "You are a liability. You forged a signature on an NDA. Oh yes, my lawyers saw that. That is fraud. You failed to disclose a conflict of interest regarding the Valorian supply chain. That is negligence. And you publicly embarrassed the company by harassing a foreign dignitary at the Preston Smith Gala. That is gross misconduct." She picked up a piece of paper on her desk. "You are fired, Richard. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." "You can't," Richard screamed. "I have a contract. I have a severance package. I have stock options." "Your contract has a morality clause," Catherine noted dryly, "which you violated. Your stock options. Vested, but since the company is now privately held by the trust, we are freezing them pending an investigation into your embezzlement." "Embezzlement?" Richard gasped. "I never stole a dime." "We'll see what the audit finds," Catherine said, looking bored. "Audits can take years, Richard. In the meantime, your assets are frozen." She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, you remain as CEO, for now. I expect a full report on how we can improve employee welfare by Friday. I want paid maternity leave doubled and a new cafeteria. One that serves real food, not processed garbage." "Yes, Your Highness," Marcus said quickly. "Richard," Catherine said, her voice dropping an octave. "One last thing." Richard looked at the screen, tears of rage and humiliation stinging his eyes. "The house," she said. "The one you didn't want, because it was a depressing museum? I'm taking it back. It was purchased with a down payment from my personal account, the one you thought was empty. My lawyers will be in touch about the eviction notice. You have 24 hours. "Where am I supposed to go?" Richard whispered, broken. Catherine tilted her head. "I believe Brittany has a one-bedroom apartment. Perhaps you can fit there. If not, I hear the library is hiring." The screen went black. Richard walked out of the Auratech building carrying a cardboard box. It contained a stapler, a photo of himself shaking hands with a senator, and a stress ball. That was it. 10 years of work reduced to a single box. It was raining. Of course it was raining. He walked to his Porsche in the parking lot. He pressed the unlock button on his key fob. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Nothing. A tow truck was backing up to the car. The driver, a burly man in a yellow slicker, hopped out. "Hey!" Richard yelled, dropping his box. The stress ball rolled into a puddle. "That's my car." "Richard Sterling?" the driver asked, checking a clipboard. "Yes, get away from my car." "Repo order," the driver said, hooking the chains onto the bumper. "Company car, right? Leased under Oratech. The lease was terminated 10 minutes ago. I gotta take it." "You have to be kidding me," Richard groaned, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "She took the car, too?" "Look, buddy, I just drive the truck. You want your personal stuff out of the trunk?" Richard grabbed his gym bag from the trunk as the Porsche was hoisted into the air. He stood in the rain, watching his status symbol disappear down the street. He took an Uber to the house he had 24 hours to vacate. The ride cost him $45. He checked his bank account on his phone. Balance, $2,250. He had his last paycheck, and that was it. His credit cards were likely next. He entered the silent house. It felt colder than before. He went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Empty. He opened the liquor cabinet. Also empty. Catherine must have had Henri clean it out while he was at work. He sat on the floor of the living room, head in his hands. His phone buzzed. It was Brittany. He answered, desperate for a friendly voice. "Brittany? Baby, listen, it's been a nightmare. She's destroyed me." "I saw the news, Richard." Brittany's voice was sharp. "Business Insider just tweeted that you were fired for fraud. Fraud, Richard. Do you know what that does to my brand?" "Your brand?" Richard laughed hysterically. "I just lost my career. I lost the house. I lost the car." "And you lost me," Brittany snapped. "I can't date a felon. It's bad for my engagement metrics. Don't call me again. I blocked you on Instagram." The line went dead. Richard threw the phone across the room. It smashed into the wall, cracking the screen. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. He looked around the room. He remembered the Christmas party 2 years ago. Catherine had made mulled wine. She had worn a silly reindeer sweater. He had made fun of her for it, telling her she looked childish. She had just smiled and kissed his cheek. She loved me, Richard realized, a sob tearing through his chest. She actually loved me, and she was a queen. He crawled over to where his phone lay. The screen was spiderwebbed, but it still worked. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call a friend. He dialed the number he had seen on the divorce papers. The number for the Miller Trust Legal Counsel. A woman answered. "Miller Trust, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to her," Richard rasped. "Please, just tell her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'll sign anything. I just want to talk to her." There was a pause. Then the woman spoke, her voice professional and detached. "Her Highness is currently traveling to Valoria, Mr. Sterling. She left strict instructions regarding your account." "What instructions?" "She said that if you called," the receptionist said, "to remind you that the poor wife you divorced is no longer available to mend your problems. She suggests you learn to sew." Click. Richard sat in the darkening room as the rain hammered against the windows. He looked down at his socks. There was a hole in the toe of the left one. He stared at it, the realization of his absolute defeat settling in. He had traded a diamond for a rhinestone, and now he didn't even have the rhinestone. He was just a man with a hole in his sock, sitting in a house that wasn't his, waiting for the inevitable end. But Richard Sterling was not a man who gave up easily. His despair was quickly curdling into something else, something darker. If she wanted a war, he would give her a war. She might be royalty, but he knew where the skeletons were buried, or at least he hoped he did. He stood up, wiping his eyes. "Valoria," he whispered. "I'm coming to Valoria." The flight to Europe was a humbling experience for Richard Sterling. He had sold his Rolex, a prized possession he used to flash during board meetings, to a pawn shop for a fraction of its value. That cash bought him a one-way ticket to Nice, France, and a bus ticket across the border into the Principality of Valoria. He sat in the cramped economy seat, his knees pressed against the tray table, surrounded by crying babies and tourists. He wore a hoodie and sunglasses, paranoid that someone might recognize him as the disgraced CFO from the news. But no one looked. He was already forgotten. When the bus crossed the winding mountain pass and descended into the Valorian Valley, Richard's breath caught in his throat. Valoria was not just a city. It was a fortress of wealth carved into the Alps. Skyscrapers of glass and steel rose from ancient cobblestone streets. The harbour was filled with yachts that looked like military cruisers, and everywhere, on flags, on billboards, on the sides of buildings, was her face. Grand Duchess Genevieve, the return of our light. Richard got off the bus at the central station. He felt small. In Boston, he had been a big fish in a corporate pond. Here, the air smelled of money so old it made American capitalism look like a lemonade stand. He checked into a cheap hostel on the outskirts of the city. His plan was simple. He would find the palace, demand an audience, and if she refused, he would go to the press. Surely the tabloids would pay millions for the scoop, the secret American husband of the Grand Duchess. He would sell the story of their intimacy, their fights, her boring habits. He would humiliate her until she paid him off. He spent the first 2 days trying to get close to the royal palace. It was a sprawling complex atop a cliff, guarded by men in ceremonial uniforms who carried very real automatic rifles. "I need to speak to the Duchess," Richard shouted at the gate guard on the second day. "I'm her husband. Well, her ex-husband, Richard Sterling." The guard didn't even blink. "Sir, please step back behind the yellow line. Check your database," Richard screamed, waving his passport. "I lived with her for 5 years. She knows me." Tourists were starting to film him with their phones. A few giggled. "Sir," the guard said, stepping forward, "we have orders regarding a Mr. Sterling. You are to be ignored. If you persist, you will be arrested for harassment." Ignored. It was worse than being hated. Richard retreated, seething. He went to the offices of the Valorian Times. He walked into the lobby, demanding to see an editor. "I have dirt on the Grand Duchess," he told the receptionist. "Exclusive photos, private details." The receptionist looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Sir, the Grand Duchess owns the publishing house, and even if she didn't, the people here adore her. She lowered taxes, improved health care, and brought the tech industry to our doorstep. No one wants to read your dirt." Richard was thrown out by security. Again. He was running out of money. He was eating baguettes from street vendors. His clothes were wrinkled. The master of the universe was slowly turning into a street crazy. On the 4th night, Richard sat on a bench overlooking the harbour, shivering in the cool alpine air. He watched the lights of the palace shimmering on the cliff. "She's up there," he muttered, taking a swig from a cheap bottle of wine. "Laughing at me." A black sedan pulled up to the curb silently. The back window rolled down. "Mr. Sterling?" Richard jumped. He squinted at the car. "Who is it?" "Get in," a voice commanded. It wasn't Catherine. It was male, deep, and accented. Richard hesitated, then got in. He had nothing left to lose. The car smelled of leather. Inside sat Henri, the butler Joe bodyguard. He looked impeccable in a dark suit. "You are becoming a nuisance, Richard," Henri said, not looking at him. "Sleeping on benches, shouting at gates. It is undignified." "I want to see her," Richard snarled. "I'm not leaving until I see her." "She knows," Henri said. "She's been watching you on the security cameras for days. She finds it pathetic. But she agrees that closure is necessary." The car began to move, speeding toward the cliff road. "Where are we going?" Richard asked, a flicker of hope igniting. "To the palace," Henri said. "Her Highness is hosting the ministry ball tonight. She has granted you 10 minutes. Do not waste them." The car didn't go to the main entrance. It went through a subterranean tunnel, bypassing the press and the guests. Richard was hurried through a maze of service corridors, past kitchens where chefs prepared feasts, and up a private elevator. When the doors opened, Richard found himself in a room that looked like a museum. High ceilings, tapestries that looked older than the United States, and a fireplace roaring with logs. "Wait here," Henri said, and left, locking the door behind him. Richard stood in the center of the room, his hands shaking. He caught his reflection in a gilded mirror. He looked haggard, unshaven. His eyes were wild. The double doors at the far end of the room opened. Catherine walked in. She was wearing a silver gown that trailed behind her like liquid mercury. She wore the sash of the Order of Valoria. She looked taller, sharper, more terrifyingly beautiful than ever before. She didn't come alone. 2 guards stood by the door. "Hello, Richard," she said. She didn't offer him a seat. She didn't offer him a drink. She stood 10 feet away, an unbridgeable chasm. "Kate," Richard breathed. He took a step forward, but the guards tensed. He stopped. "You look incredible." "I look like myself," she said calmly. "You, however, look terrible. I assume the hostel life doesn't suit you." "Why are you doing this to me?" Richard burst out, the anger surfacing again. "You took everything. My job, my house, my reputation. You ruined me." "You ruined yourself, Richard," she said, walking over to a desk and picking up a file. "I just stopped cleaning up your messes." "What are you talking about?" Catherine opened the file. "Did you really think you were the best CFO Auratech ever had? You, a man who failed statistics twice in college?" Richard blanched. I worked hard. I made those deals." "You made deals because I paved the way," Catherine said, tossing a document onto the floor near his feet. "Look at it." Richard bent down. It was an email chain. From the Miller Trust. To CEO, Orion Dynamics. Subject, the Sterling Proposal Body. Please accept Mr. Sterling's proposal. The trust will underwrite any losses. We want him to feel accomplished. Richard read it, his hands trembling. He picked up another paper. From the Miller Trust. To Auratech Board Body. Ensure Mr. Sterling receives the credit for the Q3 savings. We will cover the deficit anonymously. "No," Richard whispered. "No, that's not true." "I bought your success, Richard," Catherine said, her voice devoid of pity. "I knew you were insecure. I knew you needed to feel big. So I used my network to open doors for you. I used my money to cover your mistakes. I built a playpen for you and let you think you were running the world." She looked at him with a profound sadness. "I did it because I loved you. I thought if you felt successful, you wouldn't feel threatened by me. I thought you would finally be happy. But it was never enough, was it? The more I gave, the more you wanted. And eventually, you decided the woman who built your throne wasn't good enough to sit beside it. Richard fell to his knees. The realization crashed into him like a physical blow. He wasn't a victim of a powerful woman. He was a fraud, a construct. Every victory he had ever celebrated was a gift from the wife he had called poor. "I didn't know," he sobbed. "Kate, please, I didn't know." "And now you do," she said. "The man you see in the mirror? That is the real Richard Sterling. Without me, that is all you are." She closed the file. "I brought you here to give you a choice, Richard, because despite everything, I once took a vow to care for you." Richard looked up, hope desperate in his eyes. "A choice?" "Option A," Catherine said, holding up a finger. "You continue this crusade. You try to sell stories. You try to sue. I will bury you in legal fees until you rot in a debtor's prison. I will ensure you never work in finance again anywhere on this planet." Richard swallowed hard. "And option B?" "Option B," she said. "I have purchased a small franchise in Ohio, a hardware store. It is fully paid for. There is a modest apartment above it. It is in your name." "A hardware store," Richard gaped. "I'm a CFO. I belong in a boardroom." "You belong where you can do no harm," Catherine corrected sharply. "Take the store, Richard. Learn to work with your hands. Learn to actually build something instead of taking credit for others' work. Live a quiet life. Find a nice girl who likes hardware. And never ever speak my name again." She pulled a plane ticket from her pocket and dropped it on the floor next to the emails. "The flight leaves in 2 hours. Henri will drive you to the airport." She turned her back on him. "Kate?" Richard called out, his voice cracking. Do you miss us? Even a little?" Catherine paused near the door. She didn't look back. "I miss the man I thought you were, Richard," she said softly. But he never existed. The doors closed behind her. Richard was left alone in the silent room, kneeling amidst the papers that proved his entire life was a lie. He looked at the plane ticket. Destination: Dayton, Ohio. He looked at the fire. He looked at the window, where the lights of Valoria shone like diamonds he could never touch. Slowly, painfully, Richard reached out and took the ticket. 5 years later. The bell above the door of Sterling's Hardware jingled. Richard, wearing a green apron with his name embroidered on it, looked up from the counter where he was sorting screws. He looked older. His hair was thinning, and he had gained a little weight. But he looked calm. "Hey, Rich," a regular customer, Old Man Jenkins, called out. "You got any more of that plumbing tape?" "Aisle 4, bottom shelf, Mr. Jenkins," Richard said. He didn't check a computer. He knew his inventory. He walked over to help the man. As he passed the break room, the small TV was on. A news anchor was speaking excitedly. "And in international news, Her Royal Highness Grand Duchess Genevieve of Valoria has announced her engagement to the Duke of Seville. The royal wedding is set for June." Richard stopped. He watched the screen. Catherine was waving from a balcony, a tall, handsome man beside her. She looked happy. Truly happy. "You okay, Rich?" Mr. Jenkins asked, noticing him staring. "You know who that is?" Richard looked at the screen for a long moment. He felt a phantom ache in his chest, the ghost of a life he had thrown away with both hands. But the bitterness was gone, replaced by a quiet, dull acceptance. He turned away from the TV. "No," Richard said, picking up a box of nails. "Just someone I used to know." He went back to work. Richard Sterling learned the hard way that when you marry a woman for better or for worse, you better make sure you know who she really is. He chased fool's gold and lost a diamond. So, what do you think? Did Richard deserve the hardware store, or was Catherine too harsh? And would you have forgiven him? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and royal revenge, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We post new dramas every week. Thanks for watching.